We have a massive Sacramento Kings trade update as the team has made a couple moves as of late, bringing in Doug McDermott, trading away Jalen McDaniels, and reports are indicating Monte McNair is not finished, as there's an interest in bringing in some more star power to the team, including Zach Lavine, as well as Brandon Ingram being names mentioned as targets for this Sacramento Kings roster. So we're going to break down what the reports are saying, whether or not it makes sense for the Kings to pursue this, and what the Kings would have to give up in order to make this trade happen, or one of these trades happen, because frankly, it might be surprisingly easier than a lot of people think, but it might not make a ton of sense roster-wise for the Kings to do it, even if they could buy low on a couple of these star names around the NBA. So there's a lot of stuff to dive into, but before we dive into any of that, folks, again, if you're part of the 84% of our viewers that haven't hit the subscribe button just yet, and you're tuning in for the daily Sacramento Kings coverage, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing that's going on with the Sacramento Kings team as inch closer and closer to the start of the season, and probably closer to more moves as Monte McNair has been on the phones, been doing some different, making some calls, trying to improve this roster after a little bit of a rough preseason for Sacramento. But let's dive into the report. Let's dive into what people are saying, because essentially news has come out that the Kings obviously the Kings made a trade Monday that could be a precursor to a bigger deal as they prepare for the start of the 2024-2025 NBA season. A league source has told Sacramento Bee that the Kings are trading Jalen McDaniels and their 2031 second-round pick and cash considerations to the San Antonio Spurs, confirming the report from Shams Charania. But the juicy part of this a few days ago was, hey, the Kings are setting up something bigger. It's a precursor to a move that is coming down the line. And then obviously the Dougie McBuckets thing was there. And then some Kings fans said, hey, because this is a report from a few days ago, didn't jump on the channel, but essentially this came out and said, oh, it's a big move, Dougie McBuckets. Sure, he's a cool piece. He's not a, game changer by any stretch of the imagination, but a really nice acquisition in terms of the free agent market, especially this late into the offseason. But that doesn't seem to be the case, as a second report came out that essentially indicates, from what I've heard, this come from Matt Asa, from what I heard, it seems like the Kings are not done making moves after the Doug McDermott signing. Zach Lavine or Brandon Ingram is still the goal of theirs. So this is very, very intriguing. And I've seen a lot of Kings fans very split on whether or not this makes sense, whether or not this is the right move. And essentially, for the, these star player names, they're always a bit concerning in terms of what they're able to provide, because you have to give up a ton in order to bring them in. But particularly in Zach Lavine and Brandon Ingram's case, they've dealt with some injuries and they're going to command some serious salaries moving forward into the future. So those are things that you have to take into account. But looking at these guys kind of in terms of out there on the market, like what stats they're providing, what they're doing for their teams, Zach Lavine last season, again, barely played, didn't play too many games whatsoever, but averaged 20 points per game, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. Couple of seasons ago, did average close to 27 points per game, so that is something you have to take into account. He's a solid three-point shooter and shoots 45% on corner threes, but doesn't take a ton, just given the fact that he's the primary ball handler, the primary source of offense there for the Chicago Bulls rosters. Now, obviously, Zach Lavine played many seasons with DeMar DeRozan, so that's something you can factor in with chemistry, but didn't lead to a ton of wins. But we also have Brandon Ingram, who is younger, 27 years old, averaged 21 points per game, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, for the New Orleans Pelicans, and 36% on the three-point line. A solid 30-point shooter, but does most of his work out there in the mid-range, out there in those sort of positions, but is definitely, in a vacuum, both two very star caliber players. So that's all well and good, but people are looking at this, especially the Brandon Ingram kind of look and sight, right? And they're saying, hey, this Sacramento Kings roster, it's a similar style of player. You have De'Aaron Fox. You have DeMar DeRozan. Maybe not similar styles, but De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, and DeMar DeRozan, all those guys kind of take their shots, and even Keegan Murray to a certain extent, he's a better three-point shooter, but take their shots kind of in the mid-range area. Take those shots in the mid area of the court, and that's exactly the space that Brandon Ingram loves to work in. So, there's some redundancy in terms of skill set with Brandon Ingram being brought in, even though he does fill a positional need for this team. But again, ball dominant, sort of wing scorer coming in the mix. And then Zach Lavine, we've seen that recipe before with the Chicago Bulls. They have the chemistry, but it didn't really work out there on that stretch. So a lot of Kings fans don't really want to see one of these trades end up happening, if it requires this team, having to deal away, valuable pieces and, make these types of moves. Because again, it's, future draft picks, future draft capital for a team that didn't have the deepest playoff runs, didn't make the craziest noise in last season, is always a risk. So, big names, they usually have to attract a bigger sort of package. But if we look at the specific deals, why this could actually be advantageous, a buy low moment for the Sacramento Kings, is because, frankly, these guys are kind of available in terms of what's going on, right? We can take a look at sort of recent reports. The Pelicans are finding a Brandon Ingram trade market pretty cool. Nobody wants to pay his next contract. Brandon Ingram is on an expiring contract. He's a free agent at the end of this year, and no one wants to give him the money he's earned, right? Like, they know some team is going to overpay. But if the Sacramento Kings believe he's worth that money, a trade could happen. Because the trade market is so cool, the Pelicans aren't interested in giving that much money. There could be a lower asking price for him. And then obviously Zach Lavine's expensive contract, the injuries he sustained, has kind of made him a negative trade asset in terms of stuff. So maybe even the Sacramento Kings could get some draft capital back for bringing in Zach Lavine. And frankly, again, Domantas Sabonis, De'Aaron Fox, DeMar DeRozan, they're not going to be in these packages. And Keegan Murray's not going to be in any of these packages, right? Keegan Murray would have been a Pascal Siakam trade if the Kings were willing to deal him. And Pascal is more valuable than a Brandon Ingram than as Zach Lavine, at least at the time, probably, and probably would have been a better fit, especially with this two-way presence on this Kings roster. So we can mark those 4 guys off as potential trade candidates. I'd throw Devin Carter even there, even though he's a rookie and dealing with injuries and stuff like that. So how could the Kings make one of these trades happen? Well, for Zach Lavine, this would essentially be the deal that the money could work out from in a trade with the Chicago Bulls to acquire Zach Lavine, dealing away Malik Monk, dealing away Kevin Huerter, dealing away Trey Lyles in order to make the salaries match. Now, Malik Monk can't be traded till December 15th, so this is a deal that would have to wait. It makes sense why it would have to wait, but the Kings are setting up here now at this point, so that's a potential deal that could go down. Again, Huerter was in a down season last year. Malik Monk definitely signed that new contract. It's one of the elite 6 men in the league, but has had an up and down sort of stretch recent years. But I know some Kings fans that wouldn't even be happy to deal away Malik Monk in one of these packages. And then Trey Lyles, obviously a solid big man, but if you think you can get the 27 point per game, relatively healthy Zach Lavine on your roster, you could see why some people might be swayed into doing one of these packages. So that's kind of the framework of a deal, and especially if the Kings could get some draft capital, would be an intriguing kind of risk for this team to take, especially if, they're trying to take that swing to make a push out there in the Western Conference. And even if it might seem unconventional, even if it might seem, hey, this is a distressed asset or something like that, it might be a smart move. You got to take some risks in order to, build a championship winning squad. And then you have the second option in terms of Brandon Ingram. Wouldn't have to give a Trey Lyles just given how the contract situations work. But in order to make the money work, Huerter and Malik Monk are going to be the center of any of these types of trade packages. And yes, in terms of fit, in terms of play style, offensively, it might lead to some redundancy, especially with the Brandon Ingram trade, but it is still, a 20 point per game scorer that can do different things out there on the basketball court. You are adding to the roster. I don't think that should be understated. I think that is getting understated by how some people are talking about these deals, because again, these are very buy low star caliber players. And there's a lot of things to work out. There's a lot of things to figure out when making these types of deals happen, but it's not something you should just throw by the wayside and completely ignore. Now, the area that would lead me to not pursue this path, but be a bit concerned going down this path is the lack of defense that this lineup would kind of have. De'Aaron Fox, who has stepped up a little bit on the defensive end, right? Keegan Murray, who has shown some strides out there on that end of the floor, but De'Aaron Fox, DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray, Brandon Ingram, and Domantas Sabonis is not scaring a ton of teams at the defensive end. And the team just picked up Doug McDermott, who will probably be in the rotation for the squad. We'll see potentially. It's there's not a ton of defense. Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter, not the most elite defensive squad by any stretch. Keon Ellis is really the guy that's handling your wing defense there at that point. And then hopefully Keegan Murray, if he can take some strides as he gets older, develops, and it's more mature. So that's something to factor in, the defense on the floor. It's why Zach Lavine, Brandon Ingram might not be the most exciting trade players, in terms of making one of these deals happen. And again, instead of dealing away, I guess you get off some contracts, you make some things work if you do the trade. Huerter and Malik Monk would be a loss, but if you bring a star player, maybe it makes sense. But there's free agency, there's different areas where you don't have to make these trades happen if you don't want to. But I don't know. It's an interesting spot the Kings are in. It's interesting that we're getting linked to these guys. The Kings have always been, linked in these sort of trade rumors about this level of star player. You're kind of all-star, wishy-washy all-star that can come in and be effective. And they made moves. They've made moves in acquiring these guys. I mean, that's kind of how the Kings roster has been constructed here now at this point. So it's intriguing. It's interesting. We'll see how things play out. But let me know if you guys want to see one of these blockbuster moves end up going down for the Sacramento Kings team. Let me know in the comment section down below. But you guys have the best thing as far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. Again, if you're a part of that 84%, hit that sub button, especially if you made it this far in the video. I mean, let's make it happen. But anyways, I'm signing out. Cheers.